and welcome to another episode of From Chains to Change. You got me today. We're missing our friends Sway and Marcus, but we got a really great episode today here on episode 7. We are right in the middle of the legislative session. There are a lot of bills being heard. There's a lot going on, but we're still coming to you here in the Acadiana region, bringing you the most up-to-date information about criminal justice reform. Today, we have a very special guest joining us. We're going to talk about solitary confinement. We're going to talk about what it is. We're going to talk about some of the problems with it, and we're going to talk about possible solutions and how to sort of respond to solitary confinement in our incarceration system. So stay tuned. We'll be right back with our special guest, and we'll be right back. And welcome back to From Chains to Change. I am joined here with Kiana Calloway, and he is going to be joining us here. He's from New Orleans, from Vote in New Orleans, and we're going to be talking about solitary confinement. But first, we always do, anytime we have somebody on the show, we always do a story of self. So Kiana, if you could, tell us what brought you to Vote and what brought you to criminal justice reform and this fight for criminal justice reform.
Awesome. But first off, thank you for having me here from Change to Change. What brought me to this space is that I am directly impacted by our criminal legal system. At the age of 16, I was arrested for 2 counts of first-degree murder. By the time I was 18, I was convicted, sentenced to serve 2 life terms without the possibility of probation and parole or suspension of sentence. And throughout my entire quest of serving time forcefully, may I add, I was wrongfully accused and convicted for those crimes. I always pride myself on doing what's right because I see that at that particular juncture, I really understood that we have a criminal legal system that doesn't have everyone's best interests at heart. So I believe that it's all of our obligation to really like get enthused, get in tune, and get energized about, how can we rectify a broken system, or should I rephrase that, a system that is rolling just the way that it was designed, it's not broken. But maybe I was released in 2011, so I just made 15 years in April last month. All praises due to God for the opportunity not only to be free, but to be doing this work. And I ran into, and I've been on Norris forever since I was incarcerated, Norris and Chico and Rhino and everyone that's kind of like involved in the organization. But when I came home, I ran into Bruce Wiley at a post-incarceration syndrome support group. And we just talked and like, man, you need to come to the office, man. You need to come pull up on us, man. We had voting, I think that was like 2015. And I've been there ever since, you know. So I was a volunteer for maybe about 3 or 4 years over at Vote, just learning the ropes, just being in spaces with like-minded individuals that believed in collective and unified power is power, unified people is power. And I had the opportunity to really like work on the voter restoration campaign in 2015, 16, around that time, man, and that kind of like
Act 636.
Yeah, Act 636.
It's a big one.
Yeah, I played a nice role in organizing around that space, advocating, educating people, community involvement, and then it just continued to spew, right? It spewed to the Yes on 2, the non-unanimous jury piece that was huge here in Louisiana. I was convicted twice of non-unanimous jury, so our criminal legal system didn't really do their job. So that was like a big piece of organizing for me, being able to get throughout the state, not just in New Orleans, but taking it to Terrebonne Parish and Homer, and bringing it to Jefferson Parish, bringing it to New Iberia and other spaces, and educating individuals about why it was so important for everyone to like come together and really understand how our voices need to be heard. And then maybe kind of like going into the next phases of life, housing discriminations was huge. Not only directly impacting myself, but other individuals that coming home from our incarceral states systems. it's really a deterrent, you know, first and foremost for individuals' morale, having great jobs and having family support and community support and, you know, money in hand, and you go to fill out an apartment complex and you're being denied just because of your criminal background record. I think that was criminal and still is criminal here in the state of Louisiana. So working through VOTE, I was able to be a housing justice organizer statewide, like working in different areas, trying to really add protections for people returning home from incarceration in the housing sector. So I probably did that for about 3 years over at VOTE, which was awesome. We made great strides. But yeah, so now I'm no longer an employee, but I'm definitely a super member. Right now, I'm my 9 to 5 is working with the Jesuit Social Research Institute,
Okay.
researching higher education in prisons and jails across statewide, trying to figure out ways that we can make education accessible, right? And not only accessible, but accreditable.
Yeah.
So individuals can come home with these degrees and land into an institution that really accepts them.
Yeah. You're speaking my language there. I'm a
Yeah, no,
professor of education, so absolutely. We'll have to connect more after this. You said something in your story of self that I think really resonates with a lot of people. You said a lot of things, but one thing you mentioned is, right, like you went from being in such a marginalized space, wrongfully convicted, incarcerated, to recognizing your voice mattered. What made you realize, right, like that you have a voice? Because for a lot of folks who are incarcerated, they don't feel like they have a voice, right? Like it is criminally stripped from them in so many ways.
Right. I mean, I think that's why, shout out to VOTE, you know, being a voice for voiceless, right? Because a lot of individuals that are currently incarcerated are voiceless, right? Not having the opportunity to really speak truth to power while you're incarcerated is huge, because you're already feeling the oppressor superiority, inferiority type of mindset, right? And like I said, I was 16 when I was going through these trial proceedings, and I was ignorant to what any type of criminal code of procedure looked like. So I was silent, right? I didn't know what to do or what to say at this particular juncture in my life. And my mom even told me today, she said, you know what? Your entire trial, you just was smiling. Like, you just was smiling. Your life is, you know, here's the penalty phase, right? You went up for the penalty phase, and the penalty phase is, you know, your life is being tried for a death penalty, whether it's life or death in prison after conviction, right? She said, even through the penalty phase, you was just smiling, like it didn't faze you. I said, it really didn't, because I didn't understand what I was going through. I was a child. But then once I've made it to the spaces like Angola, that was my first stop after ARDC. When I made it to Angola and I started seeing influential brothers that was really speaking their voice, you know, like, hey man, I'm not eating that, it's cold, bring us some more food down the tip. You know, small things like that that really shows collectively change can happen, right? So, and knowing that these individuals who's doing this work now on the outside, I was recently, well, you know, in the past incarcerated with them, and they were doing the same style of organizing, right? Organizing brothers to not only just educate themselves, but advocate for what's right on the institutions, you know? And being able to connect myself with brothers like that on the inside, I think it'll be the best thing for me to do when I come home.
Yeah. Absolutely, and you mentioned something that relates to what you joined us to talk about today, right? Like using your voice to advocate for just the humanity of people, right? Like even in that comment of like, this food is cold, right? Like we so often take those small things, that treating people inhumanely in those small ways. And solitary confinement is one of those ways that we treat people so inhumanely. So for the folks at home, can you explain a little bit about what solitary confinement is, what happens, right? Like walk people through, because for some people at home, they're just viewers who don't know much about the criminal legal system or incarceration, and so they hear solitary confinement, right? They have an idea in their head, probably from movies or TV. Give us a little bit about what solitary confinement is, what happens, and then some of the sort of repercussions of it.
Okay. First off, solitary confinement is being confined in a cell alone or with someone else for more than 23 hours a day. You know, you're being locked away from human contact. You're being locked away from natural elements, air, wind, fresh air. And in some instances, you're even deprived of educational materials, as small as writing materials, or you're even deprived from receiving mail or phone calls, or sometimes even taking a shower, right? We know that solitary confinement through the United Nations has been deemed to be cruel and unusual punishment. And recommended on the one of the Mandela rules in 2016, which stated that no man should be placed, no man, woman, or child should be placed in a cell longer than 15 hours a day. But we know that the state of Louisiana is not adhering to that, and not only just the state of Louisiana, but there are a lot of other states that are not adhering to that. But here in Louisiana, we've been very successful in working toward achieving legislative victories when it comes to the population of people that are being placed in solitary confinement, or the length of time individuals stay in solitary confinement. We've even got to the nitty gritty of even defining what solitary confinement is. Right? Because once we get in these certain spaces, we can kind of understand that everyone has a different terminology of what the definition is. Like one particular time, they may call it administrative segregation, but you're in a cell 24 hours a day, no human contact.
I remember, I think it was a couple summers ago, there was the lawsuit against the state for housing the youth at Angola, and the state was claiming they're not in solitary confinement because they're in cells next to each other. And it's like, no, they're in their cell by themselves, 23 hours a day.
Yeah, and that's the big piece that we're working on right now, because if we want to really continue to protect our youth and have some type of empathy and mechanism set up for our youth to thrive, then we should not subject them to cruel and unusual punishment. So in 2019, we addressed that with a piece of legislation to address the length of solitary confinement for young people in cells. And actually, the bill passed. Bipartisan support went through the House and the Senate committee. There's also a story behind that. But and that was in 2019. Here we are, 2025, and we're still getting calls that these young people are still being in these cells for longest periods of time with no administration or no mediator or assessment to come in and try to deem them to be fit to come back in population. So that's what the Louisiana Stop Solitary Coalition, and I'll kind of tell you a little bit about that also. I am also a member of the Louisiana Stop Solitary Coalition, which is a group of coalitions across the state of Louisiana that compromises over about 500 faith-based community groups, organizations, advocates, and directly impacted individuals. And we've been identifying the issues and harms of solitary confinement here in Louisiana, and our goal is to end it by 2028. And I've been probably working with LSSC now for about 5 years, just on this issue, probably 9 years altogether as a whole, right? And we've had great success, whether it was ending solitary confinement for pregnant women in their trimester, so they can't be handcuffed behind their back while they're pregnant. That was great legislation. We've also created a Safe and Alternatives to Segregation Task Force, a legislative task force that compromises of all the stakeholders, Department of Corrections, faith-based organizations, directly impacted individuals. That was in 2020, and we've been kind of really building on inside of these groups. I'm also a member of that task force. Inside of these groups, we really rectify what solitary confinement looks like.
Yeah.
We discuss even the rule book inside of the institutions to kind of limit what can warrant an individual to be in solitary confinement, right? And also kind of shrink it a little bit, because if we're deemed for rehabilitation, then we shouldn't be deemed for punitive measures just because you don't have your shoes under the bed correctly. So that was a lot that we did throughout that time, but one of the most important pieces for me was the juvenile piece. So this year, instead of going up with legislations or creating a bill, what we did was we created a Senate resolution, and this resolution will be designed to kind of mimic the Safe and Alternatives to Segregation Task Force, but this time we will put together a lot of young people so that we can allow these young people to come into this study group along with governmental task force and stakeholders in the Department of Corrections, and we can have this conversation to kind of take a deeper dive into what's happening inside of these young institutions and also these adult facilities that are housing young people. We know that young people cannot be kind of in the population with the adults, but why should they be warranted to just being in the cell that long? We know the harms, we know it brings severe anxiety and depression and PTSD. All of that derives off of being locked in these cells for so long. And I don't believe that we should even consider tearing our young people down. We should be investing into building them up.
Yeah, there's a lot in the, as Louisiana is attempting to put more and more young people in the same facilities as adults, right? It strains an already strained system because for those of you at home who don't know, kids have to be separated by sight and sound, meaning they cannot be within sight or in sound of an adult. And what that often means for the kids who are in an adult facility is they get all those services cut out because they can't be moving in and out of their cells. And so it really highlights an injustice compounding on an injustice in many ways because Louisiana has not invested in rehabilitative services for our youth. And so the scarcity of those services means they're often denied or cut, and it's a compounding injustice on injustice. You mentioned some of the negative consequences of solitary, right? Denial of services, some of the trauma that people experience. Children and adults, I imagine, right? Like, what are some of the negatives that are associated with the practice of solitary confinement?
So actually the negatives considered with the practice is the harms, the psychological harms that can kind of like derive from that space, right? Just for instance, if an individual has been, I'm gonna take the person out of it and just put a dog. Say you put a dog in a cage for long amounts of time and not properly feed them or give them the opportunity to run out and play and jump in the yard. Eventually, once you come to give this dog something, the dog is gonna snap in some way, shape, form, or fashion. And it's not because the dog wants to snap, right? It's just the trigger inside of the psyche of that animal that warrants him to snap, right? I'm just tired of being in here, so I want to get out. So I'm going to get out the first time that I could, the best way that I can. If it's aggression, if it's with, some type of maneuvering, but that's the same form of the individual. When you place an individual inside of these confined spaces for so long, it brings off negative energy. It brings off negative warrants, but not because that individual wants to act that way, but it's just the way that he's wired because of the way that, his transmissions are not pushing out past these cells. And the reason why I speak in that form is that by me being directly impacted and spending time in solitary confinement and seeing the effects of these tremendous conditions and treatment that's being taken place, I've watched men just literally beat their head on the wall for hours and hours and hours. I've heard men just wake up in the middle of the night and just start screaming and crying, and then they wake up the next day and he's not here, right? So these are the certain identifiers, key identifiers. I really believe it's what keeps me fueled to continue to do this work because. As we're having this conversation, there's probably over 150,000 individuals that are currently in the cell right now. Right now, as we're having this conversation. So, when I think back to these instances that I just kind of described as cleanly as I possibly can, but also I wanted to be as vivid so people can really feel where I'm coming from. That's happening right now.
Yeah. I think folks at home need to take a minute and sit with that, right? Like as you're watching this, as we are recording this, as we're thinking about it, there are folks in that condition right now.
I know. And I try to take a few moments of my day, because 24 hours of freedom, it seemed to go fast, like if sometimes I tell my partner or my coworker, man, that's not enough time. That's not enough hours in the day. But then when I kind of sit back and just meditate and reminisce and reflect back on where I've come from, I can remember when I was saying, damn, when is this day gonna be over?
Yeah.
You know, because everything is multiplied by 10 inside of those spaces.
Yeah.
If it's hot outside, it's going to be 10 times hotter inside. If it's cold outside, it's going to be 10 times colder outside. Right? So we have to kind of identify, me personally, every time like I have conversations or speaking in legislative committees or at city council hearings or wherever I am and I'm having this type of conversation, I really like to ground people, right? Like let's sit down and just think about it. Right now, today, as we speak, there are over 150,000 individuals that are in a cell serving long, harsh conditions, impunitive conditions at this particular point, should I just say. And I want to bring them into the space because we are fighting for you here in Louisiana. We are fighting for you nationally. And hopefully, once we take it all the way to the threshold, we'll probably have this rectified. Like I said, we're trying to have it done by 2028.
Yeah.
That's a goal that we worked on, and we worked on that in 2018. You know?
Progress has been made.
Yeah, progress has definitely been made, and it's not gonna stop, man, because like we talked a little bit earlier about the power of the ballot.
Yeah.
Right. About restoring the voting rights for over 40,000 individuals here in Louisiana that have been directly impacted by our criminal legal system. And for us to get to that point, we also must be mindful that it hasn't been over 60 years or 70 years to where people were just outright blatantly ignored and denied access to democracy, right? So people were suffering in silence then, right? So here we are suffering in silence today, just in a different way. We're dealing with so many systemic racism webs that's woven into, into the way that we perceive life, instead of just thinking that morally, redemption is possible. Just thinking that morally, rehabilitation is possible. And just look at it morally, in every aspect.
I think you mentioned Bruce Riley earlier in the show. I think about we had him on a couple of seasons ago, and he talked about 95% of people who are incarcerated are coming home, right? At some point, 95% of people come home. And I think about that in terms of solitary confinement, and nobody can be their best version of themselves in isolation.
Right.
Like humans are designed to be social. It is built into our culture, our DNA, our fabric of our being, right? Like people are designed to be in community with each other. And how can you, 95% of people come home, how can you have the best version of people coming home if you're locking them away, right? If you're creating all this trauma and all these negative outcomes, right? It doesn't help anybody rehabilitate. It definitely sets people back. And I mean, I think if the goal is to break people and to make them the worst versions of themselves, it's successful at that.
Yeah, they're definitely successful.
But it doesn't help any of the rehabilitation.
So, and I think that there's also a topsy-turvy to that also, right? Because like I said, the way that each individual is wired, right? Because as cruel and torturous as solitary confinement was, I survived it.
Yeah.
And I know many, many, many other individuals that survived it, right? And as cruel as it was, and I know of many others who haven't survived it. So we have to also take into account that when you talk about the 95% of individuals that are coming home, it's probably a high number, like 20% of those individuals that would be released home coming straight out of those solitary cells. But we always want to talk about the importance of public safety. How can we re-envision public safety when our public is not really being safe to us inside of these spaces? That was once a quote from Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow. Yeah, when she states that it seems like people returning home from incarceration is the only social group that America has permission to openly hate. right? And the reason being is that not only just being discriminated out of all facets of life, you have to come home and bear the scars and wear those lashes of how you were treated inside of those spaces.
Yeah.
And we were just talking about how slavery is just incarceration by a different name,
Yeah.
right? And we talk about convict leasing, and we talk about property, and we talk about all of these other elements that were put into place to kind of deprive and stagnate the development of a population of people.
Yeah.
That's the same thing that's taking place now with the laws that are targeting certain communities. But not only that, once you get into these incarceral states, the dynamics completely flip, right? Because here you are in civilization here in Louisiana, where only 26 to 13 to 26% are African American. But once you get inside of these institutions, those numbers flip.
Yeah.
So now you have 86 and 76% of individuals in these institutions are African American. So it comes where the treatment, it just becomes completely,
Yeah, and I think about the lawsuit, the current lawsuit that's going on about field work and the heat conditions, and right, like when you're not safe both inside or outside, right? You're not safe anywhere. We have another episode coming up. Kiana's going to hang around and film episode 8. We're going to take a quick break right now, but we got lots to talk about, and Kiana's coming back with us in just a moment. We'll be right back. And thank you so much for joining us for another episode of From Chains to Change. It was great talking to Kiana here today. We want to remind folks that we have our next vote chapter meeting, Lafayette chapter meeting, on May 15th at Trinity Spaces from 6 to 8 p.m. You can see the address right down there. Please join us. Please come connect with us and join this fight with us. And with that, we say, no surrender, no retreat.